Good afternoon. My name is Dominic Adorno. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Operations at LifeCenter Northwest in Bellevue, Washington. On behalf of my colleagues, Candy Wells and Kevin O'Connor, and the entire LifeCenter Northwest staff, we'd like to thank the American Transplant Congress for the opportunity to share our experience, successful heart utilization and outcomes with long-distance transport of deceased donor hearts, one large organ procurement organization's 5-year experience. I have no relevant disclosures. We're reminded every day that donation is a rare and remarkable process. The generosity of the person at the center of the process, the donor, touches everyone who takes part, from family members to medical professionals and the transplant recipients. And we're extremely grateful to all those that have given the gift of life because without them, none of what I'm sharing today would be possible. LifeCenter Northwest is one of 58 federally designated organ procurement organizations in the U.S. Our 4-state service area includes Alaska, most of Washington State, northern Idaho, and Montana. Our service area is a little over 808,000 square miles, making it the largest service area of the 58 OPOs. We have roughly 9 million people in our service area, 200 hospitals, 5 transplant centers made up of 15 different programs, 3 of which are heart programs. And in 2019, we provided 924 organs for transplant. Alaska is the largest state in the U.S. and makes up roughly 71% of LifeCenter's total service area, yet it has the third smallest population size at roughly 732,000. Alaska has 13 hospitals with organ donation potential, which produce about 26 donors per year, and the occasional moose that'll enter a hospital lobby looking for some plants to graze on. According to a recent study published in JAMA, Alaska had the second highest number of donors per 10,000 deaths in the world at 71.7. This compares to the US rate of 38.1. Facilitating donation in Alaska presents many logistical challenges, including weather, flight options, etc. However, nothing is more significant than simply just the distance between Alaska and the nearest US transplant program. Roughly 90% of the donation activity comes out of Anchorage, which is 1,250 nautical miles from the nearest U.S. transplant program and LifeCenter's main office. To get a sense of just how far 1,250 nautical miles is, I created a circle around Seattle with a 1,250 nautical mile radius. As you can see, the circle extends beyond Belleville, Kansas, which is often cited as the center of the U.S. And for a little more perspective, if I place Belleville, Kansas in the center of that same circle, you can see the service area would include just about the entire United States. So why is this relevant? The Scientific Registry of Transplant Recipients classifies hearts, lungs, and livers as hard to place if the donor hospital is greater than 500 miles from the transplant program. So by definition, every heart allocated from the state of Alaska is hard to place. We also know that long-distance transport of deceased donor hearts and the increased cold ischemic time has been associated with reduced organ utilization rates and risk of inferior outcomes. The purpose of our study was to analyze the impact of long-distance transport on heart utilization rates and transplant outcomes. We conducted a 5-year retrospective review of brain-dead donors at LifeCenter Northwest, and we examined heart utilization rates, heart observed to expected ratios, and heart transplant survival rates at 1 year. We stratified our data into 3 groups. Group A represents donors from the state of Alaska. Group B represents the donors from the rest of LifeCenter's service area, so Washington, northern Idaho, and Montana. And Group C represents the rest of the country. We used a mixture of data sources to compare the 3 groups. To measure heart utilization rates, we used LifeCenter and SRTR data. The heart observed to expected ratios were calculated using the July 2019 organ yield model coefficients. And finally, to calculate the 1-year heart transplant survival rates, Groups A and B utilized the UNOS OPO report of organ outcomes, while Group C used the July 2019 SRTR program-specific report. We were not able to effectively benchmark the US and Canadian programs, so those transplants were excluded. So what did the data show? Over the 5-year study period, Group A had 111 brain-dead donors with a heart utilization rate of 42%. The observed to expected ratio was 2% better than expected, and the unadjusted 1-year patient survival rate was 95%. And although Group A had a lower utilization rate and a lower O/E ratio than Group B, it did outperform the nation as a whole in all 3 categories. Over the study period, Group A had 47 heart transplants. The distance from OPO to transplant center ranged from 1,150 to 2,055 nautical miles, with an average of 1,473. The donor ages ranged from 3 months to 52 years, with an average of 24.9. The cold ischemic time ranged from 1.5 hours to 8.18 hours, with an average of 5.72. And there were 5 cases in total that used the OCS perfusion device. So our experience has allowed us to conclude 2 things. 1, that remote donor location and associated long-distance transport of deceased donor hearts were not associated with decreased utilization nor inferior 1-year patient outcomes. And 2, that high donor heart utilization rates and acceptable heart transplant outcomes are possible with long-distance transport of deceased donor hearts. So tying this all together, there's been some spirited debate about broader organ sharing. And with a steady supply of donor organs recovered in places far from our transplant programs, LifeCenter's been conducting a natural experiment in sharing organs from remote locations well in excess of 1,000 nautical miles. And for years, cold storage was the sole approach to organ preservation. But more recently, we have begun to see an increased use of new approaches like normothermic heart perfusion, which may mitigate some of the risks of transporting organs over long distances. And our large geography has necessitated an early adoption of an OPO-employed organ recovery staff. This model has been in place for all abdominal organ recoveries in our service area for over 15 years with excellent results. And the potential to expand this type of model to allow thoracic organs to be recovered by OPO-employed or OPO-contracted thoracic surgeons really holds promise, I think, for the future and could reduce the need for recovery teams to fly over long distances, have substantial cost savings, and some improved efficiencies. And finally, in light of the current COVID-19 pandemic, the use of telemedicine and specifically digital image sharing, coupled with the ability to observe the recovery surgery in real time, offers promise for increasing the recovery and utilization of organs from remote locations for all OPOs and transplant programs in the U.S. Thank you for attending this session and allowing us to share our experience with you. I would like to acknowledge the frontline staff at LifeCenter Northwest for their continued efforts in making donation happen on a daily basis. And finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank our hospital partners in Alaska for their tireless efforts in making Alaska one of the most successful donation regions in the world. Thank you.